The letter had come in a plain manila envelope postmarked from Savannah, Georgia, and tucked between overdue bills and a supermarket flyer. Jack Delaney had almost thrown it out with the junk mail, but something about the handwriting, sharp, slanted, strangely familiar, made him pause. He stood at the kitchen counter holding it for a beat longer than necessary, while the kettle behind him began to hiss. He wasn't expecting a letter from anyone, let alone from a lawyer's office. Not now. Not after all these years. Maddie's voice floated in from the hallway. "Dad, are we still out of almond milk, or did I just hallucinate it?" Jack didn't answer right away. He slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the pages, slowly eyes skimming the legal formalities until he found the part that changed everything. To Mr. Jack Delaney, you are the sole beneficiary of the property formerly owned by Mr. Harold Delaney, located at 22 Crescent Wharf Lane, Savannah, Georgia. The deed has been transferred to your name. His stomach dropped. Harold Delaney, his father. He hadn't seen the man in over 30 years, hadn't spoken to him since he was 16, and left Savannah with a backpack and a grudge so thick it felt stitched into his skin. And now he was gone. Dead. And had left Jack. A property. What is it? Maddie stepped into the kitchen, the sleeves of her oversized hoodie hiding her hands. Her long brown hair was pulled up in a messy knot, eyes curious but guarded. Jack looked up from the letter, still processing. Your grandfather left me something. Her eyebrows lifted. Wait, you mean the grandfather? The one you've never talked about? He nodded slowly. Apparently I now own a garage in Savannah. Maddie blinked. A garage-like with cars and grease and scary old man energy. Jack gave a breathy laugh, but there was no humor in it. Probably all of that. And more. He folded the letter and set it on the table like it might explode. Then he leaned back against the counter, hands gripping the edge. For the past decade, his life had been a loop-work home fix, dinners, manage Maddie's school stuff. Pay bills late, wonder where the spark had gone. He was a single dad, holding it together with duct tape and quiet exhaustion. Every morning he drove a school bus for Chatham County. Every night he fell asleep, wondering when he'd get to feel like himself again. Savannah felt like another life, a more complicated one, a part of him that had curled up and gone quiet. Maddie poured herself the last of the oat milk and watched him over the rim of her glass. So what are you going to do? Sell it? I don't know. Yet. He said, though, a small part of him whispered that maybe he needed to see it. To understand why a man who hadn't so much as called him on his birthday had left behind a garage with his name on it. 2 days later, they were on the road. Jack hadn't driven south in years. The highways were the same, but the skyline as they rolled into Savannah felt smaller than he remembered. It was like walking back into a room you'd grown out of but never stopped thinking about. Maddie was curled in the passenger seat, earbuds and sketchbook in her lap. She wasn't saying much. Not that Jack blamed her. He hadn't exactly painted the town in the warmest tones. But still, something about being here made the air feel heavier. It wasn't grief, not exactly. More like unfinished business stirring itself awake. They pulled up to the house of Clara Mae Brooks just before dusk. Porch light on. Wind chimes singing low. Jack sat in the car a minute longer than he needed to. Clara Mae had raised him after his mom died, had cooked him through heartbreak, and scolded him through teenage fury. She hadn't aged in his memory. He didn't know what seeing her now would do to that. The screen door creaked open before they even knocked. Well, I'll be, Jack Delaney, Clara Mae said, wiping her hands on a floral dish towel. Her hair was white, now coiled tight around her face, and her eyes were just as sharp as he remembered. He managed a small smile. Hey, Aunt Clara, you look tired, she said, pulling him in for a hug. and older, but mostly tired. Maddie stepped forward, giving a polite half-wave. "Hi, I'm Maddie." Clara turned to her with a warmth Jack hadn't expected. "Of course you are. You've got your mother's chin and your daddy's worried brow. Come in, both of you. Supper's just off the stove." Inside the house smelled like cornbread and rosemary. Nothing had changed, the same crocheted throws on the couch, the same grandfather clock ticking in the hall. It was like the place had been waiting for them. Over dinner, Clara asked careful questions. How was work? How was school? How was life? Jack gave short answers. Maddie gave even shorter ones. Eventually, Clara leaned back and said, "Well, I suppose you didn't come all the way back here just for my peach cobbler?" Jack hesitated. "He left me something." She nodded like she'd known this moment was coming for years. "The garage? What's the deal with it?" Clara took a slow sip of tea. "He worked on it right up until the end. Never let me inside, not once. Said it was for you." Jack blinked. For me, he didn't even know me. Clara looked at him, then really looked. He knew more than he let on. Didn't mean he got it right. But don't mistake silence for indifference, Jack. The next morning, Jack drove to 22 Crescent Wharf Lane. The garage stood at the edge of a cracked lot hidden behind an old cypress tree and a leaning sign that read, "Delaney Auto Est, 1974. The letters were faded paint peeled from the shutters. Weeds grew along the concrete. A chain hung loose from the front doors, but the padlock had already rusted through. It looked forgotten, or maybe it was just waiting. Jack stepped out of the truck and stared at the building for a long moment. Maddie stood beside him, arms crossed, her sketchbook tucked under one elbow. "Wow," she whispered. "It's like haunted looking." Jack didn't respond. He walked up to the doors, heart thudding louder than it should have. He reached out, pushed, and the door creaked open. Inside, the light filtered through dusty windows, casting everything in pale gold. It smelled like oil and old pine, and beneath the dust and cobwebs there was something else, tools, a workbench, crates, even a wall covered in faded blueprints. But what stopped Jack in his tracks was the car. Dead center under a weathered cloth cover sat something big, low, sleek. He walked closer, pulled the cover back. A 1968 Shelby GT350. Pristine, untouched, like it had been waiting. Maddie gasped. "Dad? What is that?" Jack couldn't speak. He reached out, hand trembling, and ran his fingers over the curve of the hood. And then he saw it taped to the windshield, yellowed with time. A single envelope. His name written across it in the same slanted handwriting from the letter. He swallowed hard. For the first time in years, something shifted inside him. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe curiosity. He took a breath and opened the envelope. "If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way." Jack stood in the center of the garage envelope, still in his hand, the dust catching in the morning light like ash floating through silence. His breath echoed louder than the creak of the rafters above. The letter was short, handwritten in blue ink, his father's handwriting slanted and deliberate like a man who always meant what he wrote. Jack. If you're reading this, then you walked through the door. That's more than I ever managed with you when you were 16, and I deserve that. I built this place up for something better. I hoped you'd find it one day, and maybe understand that silence wasn't the same as not caring. I wasn't good at talking, but I was good with my hands. The Shelby's yours. So is everything in here. You'll find the key in the top drawer of the desk. If you decide to walk back out and never look back, I'll understand. But I hope you won't." Jack folded the letter slowly. His hand lingered on the edge of the paper thumb, grazing the ink like he might feel something more in the words. Dad Maddie's voice echoed from the back of the garage. "There's a room back here. I think it's an office or something." He followed her voice through a narrow corridor lined with tool cabinets and old tires. The office door opened with a groan, revealing a small room filled with dust-coated books, car manuals, and a wall covered in yellowed sticky notes. A desk sat against the far wall, its surface cluttered with engine schematics and photographs. He saw it before Maddie did. A photo pinned crookedly above the desk. Jack, maybe 7 years old. Smiling beside an open hood, grease smudged across his cheek. His father standing behind him, arm resting on the car, looking somewhere just beyond the frame. Not at the camera, not at Jack, but present. Maddie leaned over the desk, opening the top drawer. She pulled out a small brass key. This at Jack nodded. Probably for the Shelby. She held it up, catching the light. "So, what now? Are we, fixing it up, or are you going to sell it and run off to Mexico?" He gave her a dry look. "Not planning on any international escapes." Maddie smiled faintly. "It's kinda cool. This place, like a time capsule. You think Grandpa meant for you to live here? I don't know what he meant. But he left it, which means it meant something." Jack didn't answer. He was already scanning the garage again, seeing it differently now. Not as a burden, but maybe as a chance. A beginning wrapped in apology. They locked up late that afternoon, the sun lowering behind the warehouse across the lot. As Jack turned the key in the front door, he heard a voice behind him. "Well, I'll be. Jack Delaney." He turned. A woman stood just outside the gate, arms crossed, a small bouquet of wildflowers in one hand. Her dark curls were streaked with silver pulled back in a loose bun. Linen dress, worn work gloves stuffed in her pocket, and a slow, amused smile curving at the corners of her mouth. Jack blinked. Leona Green. "In the flesh," she said, walking closer. "I saw your truck and thought, no, it couldn't be. But it is. You're back." He tried to catch up with the moment. He hadn't seen her since high school. She'd been older by a few years, the girl with paint on her jeans, and the scent of lavender always following her into the hallways. She used to work part-time at the corner flower shop. Owned it now, if he remembered right. "You still remember me?" he said. Leona arched a brow. "Jack? You threw a wrench through Mr. Harmon's chemistry lab window in 10th grade and blamed it on the wind. You're not easy to forget." He winced. "You remember that? Oh, honey, the whole town remembers that." They laughed, and for a moment it didn't feel like 30 years had passed. Leona glanced at the garage. "So, you opened it?" "Yeah," he said. "He left it to me." She nodded. "He spent more time in that garage than anywhere else. I think it was the only place he felt steady." Jack looked away. "That makes one of us." There was a beat of silence. Maddie peeked out from the truck and waved. Leona waved back, then looked at Jack again, more gently this time. "You staying long?" she asked. "Just figuring things out." "Well," she said, holding out the bouquet, "welcome back anyway." He hesitated, then took it. "Don't read into it," she added. "They were extras from an event this morning, but if you show up tomorrow, I'll give you the good ones." She turned and walked away, with the kind of ease that only comes from someone who never left. Jack stood there a moment longer, watching her go, the flowers in his hand, still cool from the shop fridge. Back at Clara May's that evening, the house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Maddie set the flowers in a mason jar and placed them in the middle of the kitchen table. Clara watched Jack over her glasses. Leona came by. She did. She always had good instincts. Jack sat down, the weight of the day settling into his shoulders like an old coat. "Clara," he said softly. Why now Clara looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the stove. Harold didn't know how to fix things with you, but he knew how to build. So he built something, and hoped you'd see what he couldn't say. Jack didn't reply. Upstairs later, Maddie sat cross-legged on the bed, sketchbook in her lap. "Hey, Dad?" "Yeah, what was he like, your dad?" Jack leaned against the doorframe, thought for a long second. He was quiet, complicated, the kind of man who'd rather fix a carburetor than say how he felt. She nodded slowly, pen still moving across the page. "Do you think you'll keep it?" The garage. Jack looked at her. "I think I owe it to him. And maybe to myself." She smiled, soft and tired. "Good. I think it needs you." And for the first time in a long while, Jack wasn't sure if she meant the garage or something else. The morning air was thick with the scent of salt and old magnolia as Jack unlocked the garage again. Dew clung to the windows, blurring the inside like a memory trying to come into focus. The sun wasn't even all the way up yet, but something in him had stirred before dawn and refused to let him rest. He pulled the doors wide open and stood for a minute just watching the light crawl across the floorboards, spilling over rusted metal and half-covered blueprints. The Shelby sat in the center like an artifact, quiet and waiting. He ran a hand along the fender fingers, brushing dust. It didn't purr like it used to. It hadn't purred in decades, but there was still something alive beneath that hood. He found a stool by the workbench and opened his father's old logbook. Pages of sketches, tune-up notes, parts lists. He flipped to the last entry. Just a single line in clean handwriting. "Leave it better than you found it." A knock echoed from the open bay door, soft but certain. Jack looked up. Leona stood just outside holding 2 paper cups. She wore a denim jacket over a faded blue sundress, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. There was something timeless about her, like the garage, only better kept. "Coffee," she said. "Figured you might have been too stubborn to stop for some." Jack stepped toward her, surprised by the warmth that settled in his chest. "You figured right." He took a cup, sipped. Strong black with the bite of real grounds, just like he used to drink it. Leona looked around the garage, her gaze slow and thoughtful. "You really planning to fix this place up? I'm thinking about it." She smiled. "That's what you always said. When you were about to do something, you weren't sure you could pull off." Jack leaned against the doorway, staring out at the morning. "It's a mess in here. Years of neglect. Might not even be worth the time. It's worth something," she said, softer now. "Not just the Shelby, the whole place. Your dad put everything he had into it. That's gotta mean something." Jack glanced at her. "You two were close." Her eyes didn't flinch. "We had history. I helped him out with the shop in the early years. We tried for something once, but it didn't stick. Too much weight on both our sides." Jack nodded slowly. There was a pause that didn't feel awkward, just full. "You know," she said, setting her cup down, "if you're serious about restoring this place, you're gonna need someone who knows parts. Dean Rourke still works out of the salvage yard on Tybee. Quiet these days, but he knows engines better than anyone." "I remember Dean," Jack said. "He used to help my dad. Tall guy, smelled like cigarettes and WD-40. Leona chuckled. "Still does." Jack looked at the Shelby again. "Might be worth stopping by." She walked toward the door, pausing in the threshold. "You should." And Jack, yeah, don't talk yourself out of something just because it doesn't look like it used to. He watched her leave, the hem of her dress catching in the breeze. The flowers she'd given him the night before sat in a jar on the workbench, slightly wilted, but still hanging on. Later that afternoon, Jack and Maddie drove out toward Tybee Island. The landscape shifted from brick buildings and old storefronts to tall grass and weathered signs. Maddie leaned her head against the window, earbuds and sketchbook on her lap, though she hadn't drawn much since they got in the truck. "You okay?" Jack asked. She shrugged. "Just thinking. About what happens if we stay here. What does that mean for everything else?" Jack didn't answer right away. He understood the question too well. He'd been asking himself the same thing. The salvage yard was exactly how he remembered it, fenced in with corrugated tin, overgrown at the edges, filled with cars that looked more like relics than parts. Dean Rourke was sitting on a crate under a lean-to, flipping through a dog-eared manual and sipping iced tea from a mason jar. He looked up as they parked. Squinted. "Well, I'll be," he said, setting the jar down. "Jack Delaney. Thought you vanished for good. Still might." Jack said, climbing out of the truck. "Depends how this visit goes." Dean laughed, slow and raspy. "You need parts or guidance," both Jack said. "Shelby GT350. It's been sitting a while." Dean's eyes narrowed slightly. "That your daddy's old car, yeah?" Dean stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "Thought he might leave it to someone. Figured it'd be you." Jack hesitated. "I wasn't even sure I'd open the place." "Well, you did. That says something." They spent an hour walking through rows of car husks, Dean pointing out what might still be usable. He didn't say much, but when he did, it landed. Maddie trailed behind them, occasionally snapping photos with her phone, eyes darting from chrome bumpers to rusted-out doors. "You always this quiet?" Dean asked her. "She talks plenty at home," Jack said with a small smile. Maddie looked up. "Just listening. This place is kind of beautiful in a weird way." Dean nodded. "That's what your grandfather used to say. Ugly things still hold value if you look close enough." By the time they loaded a box of parts into the truck, the sun was low again. Dean leaned on the doorframe of the garage, watching Jack tie down the crates. "You fixing the car for resale?" Jack looked at him. "Not sure yet. Maybe just fixing it because it's mine." Dean nodded. "Good enough reason." As they pulled out of the yard, Maddie finally spoke again. "That guy's like a fortune cookie wrapped in motor oil." Jack laughed. "Yeah, he grows on you." When they got back to the garage, the street was quiet, the windows lit with the last of the daylight. Jack unlocked the front door, flipped on the old overheads. The Shelby sat just as they'd left it. Maddie dropped her bag and walked over to the mural-covered wall she'd started sketching the day before. She ran her fingers over the lines, then turned to him. "Maybe we could do it, you know. Restore it. Together." Jack swallowed. There was something in her voice, hope mixed with fear, like she needed to believe in something steady, in someone who wouldn't leave a project half-finished. "We can," he said. "We will." She smiled barely, then sat on the floor and opened her sketchbook. Jack sat beside her legs, stretched out back against the wall. Somewhere behind them, the old garage settled with a sigh, like it too was ready to begin again. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The storm rolled in just after noon, one of those Savannah downpours that came without warning, the kind that darkened the sky in a matter of minutes and made the air so thick you could feel it pressing on your skin. Jack stood just inside the garage, arms crossed, watching the rain sheet off the roof and pool across the cracked pavement. It sounded like the sky was trying to scrub the world clean. Maddie was inside the office, sketching again. She'd started a new piece. Him bent over the Shelby's engine sleeves, rolled up oil smudging his jaw. She didn't say much when she worked, and he didn't interrupt her. That was their rhythm now. Quiet, but connected. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to the old filing cabinet near the tool chest. He hadn't touched it yet, mostly because he wasn't ready to see what else his father had left behind. But something about the storm made him restless. He opened the top drawer. blueprints, receipts from parts dealers that didn't exist anymore, a thick binder labeled Restoration Plan Phase 2. Jack flipped it open, expecting lists and notes. But the first page was a photo, black and white, worn at the edges. His father, probably in his 30s, standing next to Leona in front of the very same garage. They were laughing, arms around each other. He stared at it longer than he meant to. He didn't hear the footsteps at first. "You found it?" said a familiar voice from the doorway. Jack turned. Leona stood there, raincoat slick with water umbrella dripping in her hand. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, eyes tired but bright. "You walk through hurricanes, too?" Jack asked, lifting the photo. She stepped inside, closed the umbrella, and walked over without hesitation. Her eyes landed on the picture. "Well," she said softly, "that takes me back. You worked with him for a while. Your dad wanted to expand the garage, thought we could turn it into a full restoration shop, maybe even a showroom. He had vision, but not much time." Jack nodded, staring at the younger versions of them. "You two were close." Leona hesitated, then looked at him. "We tried to be. But your dad was married to this place. He gave it everything. There wasn't much left for anything or anyone else." Something about the way she said it made Jack look up. "Did he ever say anything about me after I left?" Her voice softened. "He said he messed up, said you were the best thing he ever had, and he let his pride keep him from chasing after you." Jack exhaled a long, slow breath that felt like it had been sitting in his chest for years. He never called. Not once. "I know," she said. "And I know that's hard to forgive. But Jack, he didn't stop thinking about you." Silence settled between them. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, low and tired. Leona walked over to the workbench, brushing a hand over a row of wrenches like they were artifacts. "You've cleaned up in here. It feels different already." "I'm trying," he said. She looked at him. Why now Jack didn't answer right away. "Then, because I don't want to be him. I don't want Maddie to walk away one day and think I never saw her." Leona's eyes softened, then filled with something heavier. Maybe regret. Maybe memory. "You're not him, Jack? You came back?" He nodded. Barely. They stood like that for a moment, still quiet, the only sound the tapping of rain on the tin roof. Then Maddie appeared in the doorway, holding her sketchbook. "Hey, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt, I just drew something." Jack and Leona turned. Maddie hesitated, then walked over and handed Jack the book. It was a new sketch. The garage, but restored. The windows were clean, the roof fixed. A wooden sign over the door read, "Delaney and Daughter," and in the foreground, Jack stood beside the Shelby. Maddie was by his side, holding a wrench, smiling. Jack stared at it for a long time. His throat tightened. Leona leaned over to see, then smiled. "Looks like a future worth working for." Maddie tucked her hair behind her ear. "We could do it." Right, Jack didn't speak. He couldn't, not yet. But he nodded. That's when the thunder cracked again and the power flickered. The overhead lights blinked, then went out completely, leaving them in the dim, gray light of the storm. Maddie yelped. "Okay, creepy timing." Jack walked to the breaker panel, flipped a few switches. "Nothing." "Old lines," Leona said. "Wouldn't be surprised if this place still runs off half a dozen patch jobs. I'll call Clara, see if it's the neighborhood or just us." Jack said, reaching for his phone. But Leona touched his arm. "You know what? Let it be. Just for a bit." Jack paused. She looked around. "You know what this place could use? Music, laughter, maybe even dinner." Jack raised a brow. "Are you inviting yourself to dinner in my half-dead garage?" She smiled. I'm offering to bring takeout. There's a little Thai place on Broughton that still delivers in the rain. Jack glanced at Maddie, who nodded quickly. Yes, please, I'm starving, and I will absolutely not survive on vending machine peanuts again. Leona laughed and pulled out her phone. Red curry pad Thai surprise us, Jack said. As she stepped into the rain again, umbrella snapping open with a pop, Jack watched her disappear down the drive. The storm had eased a little. The streetlights flickered in the distance. Maddie leaned against the doorframe. She's cool. Yeah, Jack said quietly. You like her? Jack looked at her. Maddie. She grinned. Just saying. You haven't smiled like that in a while. He looked back towards the garage. At the photo. The drawing. The car. The silence. Maybe this place wasn't about what had been broken. Maybe it was about what could still be built. He smiled just a little. I'm starting to. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind the kind of clean, quiet air that only comes after a good soaking. Jack stood outside the garage, coffee in hand, watching the light catch in the puddles along the cracked pavement. The world smelled like wet concrete and pine. Peaceful. Like a new beginning. Maddie was inside, already humming to herself, while sorting through a pile of old tools. She'd taken to the place quicker than he expected, like some part of her had been waiting for a project this big. Or maybe it wasn't about the garage at all. Maybe it was about the two of them finally having something to build together. Jack took a slow sip of coffee, his thoughts drifting when a sleek silver SUV pulled into the lot. It didn't belong. The kind of car that looked too polished for this neighborhood, too smooth for cracked gravel and rusted signage. The driver's side door opened, and a tall man stepped out, tailored jeans, leather loafers, and a pressed navy shirt that looked like it had never seen a wrinkle in its life. His hair was perfectly in place, silver at the temple, sunglasses tucked into his collar. He smiled the way politicians do, confident, practiced, empty. Jack Delaney, he said, walking forward with a hand extended. You're a hard man to track down. Jack set his cup on the hood of the truck and crossed his arms. You found me, the man chuckled. Calvin Pratt, your cousin, on your mom's side? Jack stared. Cal guilty as charged. Cal looked around, nodding like he was assessing the property for resale. Wow, this place hasn't changed a bit, except maybe for the worse. What are you doing here? Jack asked, voice flat. Cal stepped forward, motioning vaguely at the garage. Heard through the grapevine you were back in town. Thought I'd stop by, welcome you home. Maybe have a little chat. Jack didn't move. Cal's smile thinned just slightly. I work in property development now. Small firm, local roots, big vision. We've been eyeing this block for a while. Lots of history, lots of potential. With the right upgrades, this garage prime real estate. Jack raised an eyebrow. You want to buy it? I want to help you, Cal corrected smoothly. Let's be honest, Jack. You've been out of town for 30 years. You drive a school bus. No offense, but restoring a garage and a car like that, it's a lot. A project like this, it eats time and money. Jack didn't flinch. I'm not interested. You haven't even heard the number. I don't need to. Cal's tone dipped ever so slightly. Jack, you're sitting on valuable land, and I get it, nostalgia, legacy, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you've got a daughter to think about. Stability. A fresh start. Jack stepped forward, voice low. You think this isn't a fresh start? Cal didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the garage as the door creaked open and Maddie stepped out, wiping her hands on a rag. She paused when she saw Cal. Jack turned to her. Maddie, go grab the carburetor from the back. I'll be there in a minute. She hesitated, eyes darting between them, but nodded and went inside. When Jack turned back, his jaw was set. You don't get to walk in here, throw your smile around, and talk to me like I don't know what I'm doing, he said. Cal sighed, like he was disappointed. All right. I get it. You've got your pride. It's not pride, Jack said. It's purpose. For once, I'm not running from something, I'm building it. You want this land? Find another piece of broken history to flip. This one's taken. Cal nodded slowly. You always were stubborn. Jack smiled. And you always thought everyone else owed you something. Cal turned without another word and walked back to his SUV. The engine started with a smooth hum, tires crunching over gravel as he pulled away the tail lights, disappearing down the street. Inside, Jack found Maddie by the parts shelf, her brows furrowed. Who was that guy, she asked. Your second cousin Jack said. Barely. He didn't seem friendly. Jack shook his head. He's not here to visit. He's here to take. Maddie watched him carefully. Are you okay? He exhaled, rolled his shoulders like trying to let something go. Yeah, just had to remind someone this place still has a heartbeat. Later that day, Leona stopped by with 2 sandwiches and a tin of sweet tea. Jack was under the Shelby trying to reattach a rusted-out exhaust clamp. She crouched beside him, holding the light. You met Cal yet? She asked casually. Jack slid out from under the car. Today. He always did smell opportunity before anyone else. Jack sat up, wiping sweat from his brow. He made an offer. Leona's eyes narrowed. Let me guess. Thought he was doing you a favor? Something like that. She handed him the tea. You didn't take it, did you? Nope. Good. There was something quiet in the space between them then. Comfortable. Like 2 people who didn't need to fill the silence just to feel heard. Jack looked at her. Really looked. Did you ever want to leave Savannah? Leona considered that? Once or twice, but I realized. The place you plant yourself has less to do with geography and more to do with who you become while you're standing still. Jack smiled. That's supposed to be deep. I'm not here for surface-level wisdom. They both laughed. The kind of laugh that came easy when the day had been long, but your soul felt lighter than it had in years. As the sun began to dip behind the oak trees, Jack stood in the open garage doorway and looked out at the lot, the peeling paint, the old tools, the dream waiting under layers of dust and time. It didn't look like much to someone like Cal, but to him, it looked like home. The following morning, the hum of cicadas had already begun to rise, wrapping Savannah in its familiar summer haze. Jack rolled up the garage doors early, letting the warm air settle into the space like a welcome guest. He set his coffee on the hood of the Shelby and ran a hand over the polished fender now cleared of dust, reflecting just a little more light than the day before. Progress was slow. Honest, but slow. Maddie arrived a few minutes later, backpack slung over one shoulder, a cinnamon muffin in her hand. She gave a half smile and handed it to him wordlessly. Bribery, Jack asked, taking a bite. Peace offering, she said, for stealing your pliers yesterday and not returning them. Jack smirked. You think I didn't notice? She shrugged, then looked around. You've been here since sunrise, haven't you? Couldn't sleep, thinking about the car or the cousin both. Maddie sat on the workbench, swinging her legs. He's not coming back, right? Jack hesitated. People like Cal don't walk away quietly. They wait for a moment, any sign of doubt, and they press on it. She nodded slowly. Then we don't give him one. Jack looked at her, surprised by the resolve in her voice. And just like that, the day settled into rhythm. Wrenches clinked, tools were cleaned, old wood swept. At noon, Jack stepped outside to stretch and check the mail. A single envelope sat in the rusted box. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of paper with clean, blocky type. You're sitting on something too big for sentimentality. Be smart, before someone else's. No name, no signature. He stared at it, a chill threading through his chest despite the heat. He folded the letter, tucked it into his back pocket, and walked back inside like nothing had happened. By mid-afternoon, Leona arrived. This time without flowers or food, just a manila folder in hand, and that same braid wrapped loose over her shoulder. "You busy?" she asked, stepping over a coiled hose. "Always," Jack said, "but never too busy." She held out the folder. "I pulled these from city records. Your dad filed permits 15 years ago. He wanted to convert this place into a combo shop and gallery space. Half classic cars, half community art projects." Jack opened the folder, flipping through diagrams, floor plans, handwritten notes. "I didn't know he even thought like this," he murmured. Leona smiled faintly. He didn't always say much, but he dreamed more than people gave him credit for. He wanted this to be a place where people came back to themselves. Jack blinked. "That's surprisingly poetic." Leona shrugged. He had his moments. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the sketches like they were plans for something still possible. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, expression shifting just slightly. "Everything okay?" Jack asked. "Yeah," she said, sliding it into her pocket. "It's just—" Calvin reached out. Jack's jaw tightened. "What did he want to buy me out?" she said, eyes meeting his. "He offered a partnership. Said if I convinced you to sell, there'd be space in the new development for my flower shop. Front window, prime location, easy foot traffic." Jack didn't speak. "I told him no," she said firmly. "And I told him not to call again." Relief loosened something in Jack's chest, but it was laced with guilt. "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it because this place matters. Because some things shouldn't be turned into parking garages and coffee bars with reclaimed wood countertops." Jack looked at her. "Thank you." Leona gave a soft smile. "Besides, you're more interesting than anything he could offer." She said it lightly, but it landed with more weight than she probably meant. Jack looked at her a second too long, then looked away. "You want to stay a while?" he asked. "Thought you'd never ask." They worked together that afternoon, reorganizing tools, taking inventory, and rehanging a battered old sign that had fallen behind the storage shelves. Every so often their hands would brush, or they'd share a glance that lingered. Nothing was said. But something was changing. By evening, Maddie had disappeared upstairs to Clara May's to shower. Jack and Leona sat on the garage steps watching the sun dip behind the buildings. He handed her a bottle of soda, the kind with the twist-off cap and retro label. She took it smiling. "You always did have a nostalgic streak." Jack leaned back on his hands. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to hold on to something that feels real." Leona's voice softened. "This feels real to me." Jack looked at her heart, thudding a little louder than it had all day. "You ever think about what it would have been like if we hadn't let the years get in the way?" he asked. She didn't look at him at first. Just stared out at the sky colors bleeding together like an old watercolor. "All the time," she said quietly. Jack nodded slowly. "So what do we do now?" She turned to face him, eyes steady. "We don't waste what's left." Silence. Not awkward, just full. Maddie's voice called down from Clara's window. "Dad, Clara says if you don't come eat dinner, she's going to tell me embarrassing stories about your mullet." Jack groaned. "She has photos. Trust me, we should avoid this at all costs." Leona laughed. "Go. I'll clean up here." He stood, then hesitated. "Come with us." She paused, surprised. "To Clara's." "Yeah." Her smile returned, small but steady. "All right, let me lock up." As she turned to grab her bag, Jack glanced down at the note still tucked in his back pocket. The words came back like a whisper in the dark. Be smart. Before someone else is. He stared at the garage, the Shelby, the plans his father once drew in hope. And for the first time, Jack realized this wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about protecting what was worth saving. The next morning, the garage buzzed with the low hum of purpose. Jack had cleared the back room, what used to be a storage closet, and was now scrubbing decades of grime off the floor with a bucket and a stiff bristled brush. Every tile that came clean felt like a small victory. Maddie was in the main space, sorting bolts by size, singing softly to a playlist that was mostly 70s soul and modern indie. She paused every so often to sketch, sometimes him, sometimes the Shelby, sometimes parts of the building she imagined fully restored, lit by sunlight and laughter. At some point, the music cut off. Jack looked up, confused. Maddie stood frozen, phone in hand, face pale. He walked toward her, concern tightening in his chest. She handed him the phone without speaking. It was an article, local news. Short, but sharp. Pratt Development acquires old cannery lot for new retail complex. Jack's brow furrowed. The cannery was 2 streets down, abandoned since the mid-90s. Maddie swallowed. There's a map if you scroll. He did. A red line marked the outline of the proposed development. It hugged the cannery lot, then curved, wrapping around the garage right up to their fence line. Jack stared. He's boxing us in. Leona's voice came from the door. He's doing more than that. They turned. She stood in the doorway, holding a folder under one arm, lips pressed into a line. He's filed a proposal with the city, she said, rezoning the entire block. If it goes through, the taxes on your lot are going to skyrocket. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears. He's trying to price me out. Leona nodded. It's legal. Sneaky. But legal. Maddie stepped back. He can do that. He's got city backing, Leona said. Investors? And probably a timeline. Jack exhaled, the weight of it hitting him all at once. And if I can't afford the tax hike, you'll be forced to sell, Leona finished. He walked outside without a word. The street was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant someone had already made decisions about you without your consent. He stood there for a while, hands on his hips, staring down the block at the old cannery now marked with spray-painted surveyor flags and a temporary chain-link fence. Maddie came up behind him. What do we do? Jack's voice was rough. I don't know yet. Leona stepped beside him. There's a city council meeting next week. Public input. We could make noise. Jack didn't look at her. You think that's enough? She didn't answer. That afternoon, Jack tried to work, but everything felt heavier. Every wrench felt too cold in his hand, every bolt too stubborn. He'd already fought so hard just to feel grounded. And now the ground was shifting under him again. Maddie hovered nearby, not saying much, but watching him with eyes that looked too old for her age. She was quiet the rest of the day, which only made it worse. As evening settled in, Jack shut the garage doors early. The work could wait. His thoughts needed space. Clara May was on the porch with her knitting needles rocking slow. You look like you've been chased by a memory, she said without looking up. Jack slumped into the chair beside her. Calvin bought the cannery. Clara's hands paused mid-stitch. He's boxing you in? Jack nodded. He always was slicker than a greased catfish. Jack didn't laugh. She looked at him, her eyes softer now. You're not your father, Jack. I'm trying not to be, he said. But it feels like every time I step forward, someone's already built a wall in front of me. Clara nodded. Your daddy spent years building walls around himself. Thought if he kept his head down and his heart shut, he couldn't be hurt. You're doing something different. Jack sighed. What if it's not enough? Clara set down her knitting. Then you try again tomorrow. That's what living is. The screen door creaked open behind them. Maddie stepped out, holding a drawing. She held it up wordlessly. It was the garage, but different. A crowd stood in front. Community members, kids, artists, old folks, Leona, Clara, even Dean. And at the center, Jack and Maddie, hands covered in grease, smiling beneath a new sign that read, "Delaney's More Than Just Cars." Jack stared at it, his chest tightening. Maddie said, "We can fight Dad. If we show people what this place could be." Jack looked at her voice, barely above a whisper. "You believe in it that much?" She stepped forward and laid the drawing in his lap. "I believe in you that much." That night, Jack sat alone in the garage. A single light above the workbench buzzed softly. He opened the folder Leona had given him, Permit's old proposals, handwritten margins that hinted at a man trying to build something meaningful before time ran out. He flipped to the last page. At the bottom, a scribbled line in his father's handwriting. "A place where people come to fix what's broken in cars and in themselves." Jack let out a slow breath. Then stood, walked to the center of the garage and looked around, not at what was lost, but at what still remained. He didn't have money or investors, but he had people. And maybe that was enough to fight back. Jack was back at the garage before sunrise, the sky still wrapped in gray silk, the streets quiet, except for the occasional whisper of wind through the live oaks. The world always felt clearer in that sliver of time before the day truly began, before phones buzzed and obligations pressed in. It was when he thought best, when decisions made felt like promises rather than panic. He rolled open the doors and let the morning spill in. The Shelby stood in the center of the space, half covered in a tarp, one side of its hood still lifted, waiting for his attention. But today, Jack didn't go for his tools. Instead, he grabbed a stack of cardboard boxes and started clearing the far wall. If he was going to fight for this place, he needed to show people what it could be. Not just a garage, a space with heartbeat. By the time Maddie arrived, music was already playing low on the radio, Marvin Gaye, smooth and steady. Jack was sketching something on the dusty concrete floor with chalk lines and rough shapes that she couldn't quite make out. She raised an eyebrow. "Did you sleep at all?" He looked up and smiled. "Not really. But I think I've got an idea." She set her bag down, walked over. "What is this A layout?" he said. "Of what this place could look like. If we turned part of it into a community space art wall over there, tool rental station here, maybe a classroom in the back room." Maddie's eyes lit up. "You want to open it up? I want to make it impossible for Calvin to call this place useless." She nodded, already pulling out her sketchbook. "We'll need a name. Something better than just Delaney's Garage." He paused. "What about the workshop simple?" "Honest." Her smile spread. "I love it." They spent the morning drafting flyers, snapping photos, pulling together everything they could find that hinted at what was coming, a vision in progress. Jack reached out to Dean at the salvage yard, who agreed to donate a few tools and old car frames for display. Maddie texted her art teacher, Mr. Morales, asking if any students might want to showcase their work at an open house. By noon, Leona arrived, tote bag slung over her shoulder, and her usual quiet confidence in place. "You look like you're planning something." "We are," Jack said, handing her a flyer. "Open garage night, this Friday. Free food art showcase community meet and greet. We're going public." Leona read it, then looked up, impressed. "You're going all in. I don't have a choice. If Calvin's going to push, I'm going to push back." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then you need people. Not just friend supporters. City folks. Influencers. Anyone who can speak for you at that council meeting." Jack nodded. "You know, anyone," Leona grinned. I know everyone. Over the next few days, the garage transformed. Maddie painted a huge banner that read, "The workshop built for community," and hung it between two exposed beams. Jack installed string lights, fixed up old stools, and even managed to get the engine of the Shelby to cough back to life, just for a few seconds, but enough to feel like a spark had caught. On Wednesday, Jack walked downtown to meet with Trudy Henson, the city councilwoman for their district. She greeted him in her office with a warm handshake and a tired smile. "I've heard your name more times in the last 48 hours than in the last 30 years, she said. Jack chuckled. "That good or bad depends. You're either about to stir something good or something loud." He handed her one of the flyers. "I'm not asking for favors, just a fair shot." She studied it, then glanced at him. "Calvin's coming in with a polished plan, deep pockets, and a slideshow. He's already wooing half the board." Jack didn't flinch. "Then I'll give them something money can't." Trudy folded the flyer carefully and slid it into her bag. "I'll be there Friday night. Just so you know." When Jack returned to the garage, Leona and Maddie were stringing up the last of the lights, the space now glowing with something warm and real. Jack stepped inside, and for a moment he could see it, not what the garage used to be, but what it was becoming. Leona walked over, brushing dust off her dress. "You're building more than a business here, you know." "I'm trying." She met his gaze. "You're succeeding." Something hung in the air between them again, unsaid, but felt. Jack's hand grazed hers for just a moment longer than it should have, and she didn't pull away. But then Maddie's voice called from across the room. "Dad, we have a problem." They turned. Maddie stood by the back door, a sheet of paper in her hand, brow furrowed. Jack crossed the room quickly and took it. It was a notice from the city. Property to be inspected for code compliance. Date Thursday. Purpose review for rezoning recommendation. Jack's heart dropped. Calvin pulled strings. Maddie read it over his shoulder. "Can they shut us down?" "Only if something's not up to standard," he said. "Which is possible." Leona stepped beside them. "We have 24 hours. I can call a friend who's a retired inspector. He'll tell us what to fix." Jack nodded. "Do it." The energy shifted. Tension rose. The warm glow of the space now carried urgency beneath it. This wasn't just a fight for a building anymore. It was a fight for identity, legacy, a future Maddie could believe in. That night as Jack locked up, he stood in the doorway a moment longer than usual. The banner flapped gently above his head. The engine parts gleamed under the soft lights. The faint scent of fresh paint and oil hung in the air. He touched the edge of the doorframe and whispered more to himself than anyone else. Not this time. Then he shut the door behind him and walked into the dark, already planning tomorrow's battle. The air inside the garage was thick with paint fumes, dust, and pressure. Jack stood in the back hallway, staring up at the ceiling, where a leaky pipe had left a long, discolored stain, something he'd meant to fix for weeks. It wasn't dangerous, but it looked bad. And in a city, inspection perception could sink you faster than any real problem. Dean arrived just after 7. Tool belt slung around his waist, a bucket of sealant in one hand. "You weren't kidding," he said, craning his neck to study the stain. "Nope," Jack muttered. "And that's just the beginning." Dean clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's get to work. We've got until lunch tomorrow." By noon, Jack's shirt was soaked through his hands, raw from scrubbing grime off window frames and recaulking every cracked edge he could find. Maddie and her classmates showed up with buckets of paint, filling the garage with color and noise. Murals bloomed on the side walls, abstract gears, blooming flowers bursting through rusted metal outlines of classic cars blending into cityscapes. It didn't look perfect, but it looked alive. Leona came in with 2 foldable tables and a stack of flyers. The inspector's name is Hal, mid-60s, tough but fair, likes systems, hates clutter. Jack raised an eyebrow. He's gonna love this place. You'd be surprised, she said, brushing dust off his sleeve. He also used to rebuild old motorcycles. I told him about the Shelby. He said he might want a peek. Jack gave her a grateful look. You didn't have to do all this. Leona tilted her head, her eyes catching the sunlight. Maybe I wanted to. For a moment he forgot about everything else. The noise, the deadlines, even Calvin's looming plans. All he saw was her hair tucked behind one ear, cheeks smudged with wind and effort, but still standing with him like she always had. Then the front bell rang a soft jingle from the new chime Maddie had hung on the door. Jack stepped forward. And there he was. Calvin. Sharp as ever, in a slate-gray blazer dress shoes that didn't belong on a mechanic's floor, and that same insincere smile that somehow made the air feel colder. Well, he said, glancing around. Looks like someone's been busy. Jack didn't answer. He just wiped his hands and crossed his arms. Calvin walked slowly, hands clasped behind his back eyes, skimming the murals, the tables, the fresh coats of paint. You're really going through with this? Jack kept his tone even. I am. You know the inspection's tomorrow, Calvin said. If they find even one violation. I know the rules. Calvin turned toward him. Then you know I'm offering you a chance to walk away clean, no stress, no debt. I buy the lot at market value, above market even, and you start fresh somewhere else. New job, new town. Maddie could get into a school with better funding. You'd have breathing room. Jack didn't blink. I'm already breathing just fine. Calvin's jaw tensed just slightly. Don't let nostalgia blind you. You're not saving a legacy here, Jack. You're standing in the wreckage of one. That landed. Not because it was true, but because Jack had once believed it might be, but not anymore. Jack took a step closer, voice calm. You don't get to define what this place means. Not for me, not for Maddie, and not for this community. Calvin scoffed lightly. You think a few murals and borrowed tools are going to stop a rezoning plan backed by half the city council? Jack leaned in, voice lower now. I think when people see what this place really is, they'll remember what it means to stand for something that can't be bought. A beat of silence. Then Calvin chuckled, stepping back. You always were more heart than sense. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. I'll see you at the inspection. The door shut behind him with a soft click. Jack stood still for a moment, the words echoing through his chest. Leona came up beside him. You okay? He nodded. Yeah. You sure? Jack glanced at her, and this time the weight in his eyes was real. I'm tired, but I'm not backing down. That night, as twilight settled over Savannah, the garage stayed lit. People came by to help neighbors, bringing extra fans, an older couple dropping off chairs, even a woman Jack didn't recognize delivering cupcakes for the grand opening. Word had gotten out. Jack stood outside as the sky turned a deep indigo string lights glowing above him. Maddie sat cross-legged near the Shelby, laughing with her friends, a smudge of green paint on her cheek. Leona stood by the table, organizing name tags and clipboards, her voice warm as she answered questions and shared their vision. It felt like a family, a messy, tired, hopeful one. Jack exhaled slow and full. Dean stepped out beside him, arms crossed, surveying the scene. You pulled something off here, Jack. We're not done yet. Dean smiled. No, but you're closer than you think. Inside the radio changed tracks. Etta James drifted through the garage, sweet and nostalgic. Jack closed his eyes for a second, letting it wash over him. Tomorrow the inspector would come. Tomorrow they'd find out if the workshop had legs. But tonight, the heartbeat of the place was undeniable. And Jack Delaney, for the first time in a long time, felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The morning of the inspection began with silence. No birdsong, no wind, just the distant clatter of garbage trucks 2 streets over and the steady beat of Jack's heart in his chest as he unlocked the garage. He stood for a moment before turning on the lights. The string bulbs flickered to life overhead, casting a golden glow across the freshly swept floor, the neatly stacked toolboxes, the proud banner that read, "The workshop built for community." Everything looked ready, but Jack didn't feel it. He walked the space, slowly checking corners, tightening bolts on tables that didn't need tightening, aligning wrenches already in place. His nerves weren't about code violations or paperwork. They were about what came next. If the inspector said no, if Calvin pushed the rezoning through, if the workshop died before it ever truly lived, what would he tell Maddie Dad? Her voice came soft from the side entrance. She held 2 paper cups of coffee. She wore jeans smudged with dried paint, a Save the Garage t-shirt she and her friends had printed the night before, and a smile that could have lit the entire block. Jack took the coffee and tried to smile back. She read him too easily. "You okay just thinking?" Maddie sat on the workbench. "About failing." Jack winced at the bluntness. "Something like that." She tilted her head. "You know what you said to me last week when I wanted to give up on that math test. I said a lot of things," Jack muttered. "You said what matters is that you stood up and showed them who you are." Jack sighed. "Sounds like something a dad would say." "Well," she said, taking a sip, "today's your turn." At 10:02 a.m., a white city vehicle pulled up. Jack stepped outside, wiping his palms on his jeans, nerves buzzing. A tall man in khakis and a short-sleeved button-down stepped out. Late 60s, weathered but solid. Clipboards and calm eyes. "Hal Renner," he said, extending a hand. "You must be Delaney." Jack shook it firmly. "Yes, sir." "Let's take a look then." Inside, Hal walked slowly, pen tapping rhythmically against his clipboard. He studied everything: wiring, fixtures, ventilation, even the distance between tables. Jack followed him like a shadow, answering questions, clarifying things where he could. Every now and then, Hal would grunt or nod, but he said little else. Leona arrived halfway through. She gave Jack a brief squeeze on the shoulder before melting into the background, quietly pointing out improvements and safety updates they'd completed. Dean joined shortly after, offering a few mechanical insights with his signature gravelly charm. Maddie stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes never leaving Jack. After nearly an hour, Hal paused by the garage door, flipped a page, and clicked his pen closed. Jack held his breath. Hal looked up. "Well," he said slowly, "your plumbing's outdated, your storage is tight, and you've got one electrical box that needs rewiring in the next 60 days. Jack's stomach sank. But Hal continued, "You're within regulation." And more importantly, he looked around, eyes catching on the murals, the students, the old car gleaming under soft light. "You've got something working here most places forget about." Jack frowned. "What's that heart?" Hal said. "It's not in the code, but you can't run a place without it." Jack blinked. Hal handed him a signed sheet. "You pass. Full compliance. You'll get the certificate by mail next week." Maddie let out a laugh that cracked the tension like glass. Leona stepped forward, her face breaking into a wide smile. Dean clapped once, loud, sharp, victorious. Jack stared at the paper for a long second. His hands trembled slightly as he folded it and tucked it into his back pocket. Hal turned to leave. But at the door, he paused. "Word of advice," he said. Jack nodded. "When you speak at that council meeting, don't talk about buildings. Talk about people. That's what wins rooms." Jack nodded again, heart full, throat tight. The inspector was barely gone before the garage erupted in quiet celebration. Maddie hugged him so tight his ribs creaked. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said. "We did." Leona lingered behind the others, her gaze soft and searching. Jack walked to her slowly. "I'm not sure how to say thank you in a way that actually fits," he said. She smiled gently. "Then don't. Just keep showing up." He wanted to say more. Something about how she made all of this feel less impossible, about how her presence steadied him in ways he couldn't name. But before he could, the door creaked open again. And in walked Calvin, polished again, not a speck of dust on his shoes. He glanced around, then spotted the paper in Jack's hand. "You passed," he said as if surprised. Jack tucked the sheet away. "We did." Calvin gave a slow nod. "Impressive. For what it's worth. Congratulations." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you want?" Calvin stepped closer. His tone stayed smooth. "Just to remind you, passing an inspection doesn't stop the rezoning. That's politics, not plumbing." Jack didn't flinch. "I'm speaking at the meeting," I know Calvin said. "And so are 6 of my people." "You do what you have to," Jack said. "So will I." Calvin looked around again. This time something flickered in his expression. Not malice, doubt, maybe even regret. He didn't say another word, just turned and left. After he was gone, Jack turned to Leona. "He's not finished." "No," she said quietly. "But neither are you." Later that night, Jack stood in the center of the garage as the sun slipped low light, pooling in golden puddles on the floor. Maddie worked on her mural. Dean tinkered with the old jukebox they'd pulled from storage. Leona swept sawdust into neat little piles. Jack watched it all unfold like a scene from a life he never thought he'd earn. The workshop wasn't just open, it was alive. And tomorrow they'd fight for its future with everything they had. The city council chamber smelled like wood polish and old decisions. Rows of cushioned chairs filled quickly, humming with quiet chatter. Local reporters, neighbors, and a few unfamiliar suits who clearly belonged to Calvin's world. Jack sat in the second row, hands folded tight in his lap. Maddie was beside him, legs bouncing nervously, the Save the Workshop pin on her shirt, slightly crooked. Leona leaned in from the other side. "You ready?" Jack nodded slowly. "As I'll ever be." Councilwoman Trudy Henson called the meeting to order her gavel sharp against the wooden podium. Agenda items rolled by, zoning for a dog park, a noise complaint near the waterfront, something about sidewalk repairs near Forsyth Park. Jack barely heard any of it. Then, next item proposal. 318. Rezoning of the Cannery District and adjacent lots submitted by Pratt Development. That was it. Showtime. Calvin walked up to the podium, first perfectly composed, a presentation loaded on a flash drive already waiting. The screen behind him lit up with clean graphics, glossy renderings of modern storefronts, wide sidewalks, people sipping iced lattes under string lights. It was slick, appealing, uncomfortably beautiful. He spoke with charm, referencing economic growth, revitalization, tourism dollars. He used phrases like forward momentum and urban renewal, and when he finished, he smiled like a man already writing the check. Applause from his side of the room, a few murmurs of approval. Jack stood when Trudy called his name. His legs felt heavy like he was walking underwater. But then he looked at Maddie, her eyes locked on his, silently cheering. Leona gave the smallest nod, steady and grounding. He took the podium, cleared his throat. "My name is Jack Delaney. I own the garage on the corner of East Perry and Whitaker, now called the Workshop." He paused. No slides, no flash, just a deep breath. "This place was my father's. And when I came back, it was a shell, a memory. I didn't think it could be anything more than that. But then something started to happen. He scanned the room, voice growing steadier. We started fixing more than just cars. Kids painted murals. Neighbors dropped off tools. My daughter found purpose in rebuilding, and so did I. It stopped being about bolts and engines. It started being about people. Jack let that hang for a second. I know Calvin's plan looks good. It's clean, profitable. But what we're doing, what we're building, that's something real, something rooted. It's a space for people to gather, to learn, to heal. You can't rezone that into a coffee shop. A beat of silence. Then another breath. I'm not against change, but I am for belonging, and the workshop gives people a place to belong. When he stepped back, the room didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. But it was quiet, that still electric kind of silence that means something landed. Then, one by one, others stood. Dean, hands rough and voice proud. I've worked in salvage all my life. I've seen places fall apart. This one, it's worth keeping. Clara May, rolling her walker to the podium. That garage gave my granddaughter her first summer job, and gave my block its soul back. Even Hal the inspector showed up. Unexpected, he spoke 3 sentences, but they struck deep. I've inspected buildings for 35 years. I've never seen one breathe like that place does, and that counts for something. The tide shifted. You could feel it. Calvin stayed composed, but his jaw tensed when Councilwoman Henson leaned forward, eyes scanning both sides of the room. We'll vote next week, she said. Both sides have made compelling points, but tonight reminds me why public forums matter. The meeting adjourned. The room buzzed. Jack sat down, heart pounding. He felt Maddie grab his hand, tight, proud, trembling. You did it, she whispered. Leona reached across and squeezed his shoulder. No matter how the vote goes, that was a win. Jack nodded, eyes damp but clear. It wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and they weren't standing alone. The morning after the council meeting, the garage was unusually still. Jack arrived early, but even the familiar clatter of tools or hum of music hadn't returned. Maybe it was the weight of waiting, the kind that settled deep in your chest, refusing to budge. He stepped inside, ran a hand along the old counter, then glanced around at the walls, the lights, the murals. This place had become something. And now it hung in limbo. A car door shut outside. Jack turned. Leona stood at the gate, coffee in one hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. He opened the door for her. Didn't expect to see you this early. I figured you'd be pacing by now, she said, handing him the cup. I thought you could use something to keep your hands busy. Jack took it, grateful. I didn't sleep much. Me either. They stood side by side for a long minute, watching sunlight slowly fill the garage floor like warm syrup. She's proud of you, Leona said. Jack turned his head. Maddie Leona nodded. And so am I. He swallowed hard. You know, I used to think showing up meant fixing things. That if I just worked hard enough, kept my head down, maybe no one would see how messy it really was inside. Leona's eyes softened. Jack continued, voice low. But this place, this whole fight, it's shown me something. Sometimes you've got to let people see the cracks. That's how the light gets in. She didn't answer, not right away. But she reached over and took his hand. Neither of them let go. By midday, the garage started to wake up. Maddie arrived with her sketch pad and a big smile that told Jack she was still riding the high of the night before. Dean rolled up with a box of spare parts, muttering about needing a distraction before he chewed his nails down to nothing. They kept busy. They had to. There was still no word from the council. The vote was scheduled for that evening, and no one, not even Leona, could say which way it would swing. Just after lunch, the door chimed. A familiar figure stepped in. Trudy Henson. Jack stood quickly. Councilwoman Trudy, she corrected, smiling. Please. She walked further in, admiring the space with a slower, more personal gaze this time. I wanted to see it again, she said, without the pressure of a microphone. Jack nodded. I understand. She looked at the shelves, the chalkboard wall, the half-finished mural Maddie had started near the office. Then she turned to Jack. You know, most proposals I see are polished. Strategic. They leave no room for failure, but also no room for soul. She paused. This place has both. Jack didn't know what to say. She reached into her purse and handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it slowly. It was a printout of the voting schedule, and a note in her handwriting. You have more support than you think. Don't give up yet. By the time she left, Jack felt something in his chest loosen, like hope had snuck back in through a side door. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. A few neighbors stopped by to show support. A group of students from Maddie's school dropped off handmade signs. Even the guy from the diner 2 blocks down donated a box of fresh cookies. As the sun dipped low, Jack stood in the garage once more, looking out toward the horizon. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing now with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about preserving a building. It was about protecting a place where people came not just to fix things, but to feel seen. And whatever the council decided, the workshop had already done something Calvin's plans never could. It had mattered. That evening, just before the vote, the sky cracked open with rain. It came down in soft sheets, warm and steady, wrapping Savannah in a kind of hush. The streets gleamed under the glow of the street lamps, reflections stretching across wet pavement like brushstrokes on glass. Jack stood under the awning of the garage, watching the droplets tap against the windows, shoulders hunched under the weight of too many what-ifs. Inside, the workshop was quiet. No music tonight, just the soft whir of Maddie's pencil as she added finishing touches to her mural, an image of the garage with vines growing up the bricks, stars scattered in the painted sky. It's beautiful, Jack said softly. Maddie didn't look up. I wanted it to feel like hope. He swallowed. You nailed it. She finally turned toward him. Are you nervous? He nodded. Terrified. Maddie gave a small smile. Good. That means it matters. Leona arrived not long after, umbrella in one hand, her other clutching a folded city agenda. Her eyes met Jack's as she stepped inside, rainwater sliding from her coat. They're starting, she said. I thought you might want to listen. Jack nodded and pulled out his phone. He connected it to the old speaker system Dean had rewired just the week before, turning up the city council live feed. It was all there, echoed voices, mic feedback, the usual bureaucratic hum. The proposal came up about 20 minutes in, rezoning parcel B7 and surrounding lots for mixed-use commercial development. Jack stood motionless, one hand braced on the workbench. Leona leaned beside him, quiet. Maddie sat cross-legged on the floor, hugging a pillow from the break room couch. Councilwoman Henson spoke first. We've heard compelling arguments from both sides, and I want to thank the public for their passion and their patience. The workshop reminded us what community is. Jack held his breath. Then the vote began. 5 members, one by one. The first number, second number, Jack's chest tightened. Third, yes. Fourth, no. A pause, final vote, a long silence. Then, no. The room held still. No one spoke. Even the rain seemed to pause on the windows. Maddie blinked. Wait. Did we won? Leona whispered, her voice trembling. They rejected the rezoning. Jack let out a sound, somewhere between a breath and a laugh. He leaned over the bench, hands gripping the edge like he might fall over. His heart raced, his vision blurred. We won. Maddie leapt up, wrapping her arms around him, laughing. Jack scooped her up without thinking, holding her close, her feet dangling off the ground. "Dad, we did it," she said into his neck. "You did it." He shook his head. "We did." Leona stepped forward. Jack set Maddie down and looked at her. For a long second, no one said a word. Then Jack spoke, quiet but full. "I couldn't have done this without you." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to. You let us in." Rain still fell outside, but now it sounded like applause. The soft, steady kind that wraps around a moment and says, "You've made it through." Dean arrived moments later, soaked through and grinning. Heard the news halfway through a tire change. I shouted so loud the customer dropped her keys. They all laughed, sharp and real. And the tension that had lived in their shoulders, their chests, their bones for weeks, finally let go. The garage stayed open late that night. Neighbors stopped by in the rain just to smile, to hug, to sit for a moment under the warmth of the workshop lights. Someone brought cider. Someone else brought a guitar. And the songs that followed were off-key and perfect. Jack stood in the center of it all, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Stillness. Not the empty kind. The full kind. Leona came to stand beside him, their shoulders brushing. "So," she said, glancing up at him. "What now?" Jack's mild eyes still scanning the garage. "Now, we build." The morning sun poured over the old brick exterior of the workshop like honey, catching every detail. The chipped paint, the proud mural, the wide-open garage doors that hadn't been closed since the night of the vote. Jack stood on a ladder near the front, screwing in the final letter of the new sign they'd painted together, the workshop, built by hands held by heart. It wasn't just a name anymore, it was a promise. From below, Maddie shaded her eyes with her hand, little higher on the T Dad. Jack adjusted it, then looked down. Better perfect. He tightened the bolt and climbed down slowly, wiping sweat from his brow. Never thought putting up 5 words would feel like a whole ceremony. Leona's voice came from behind. "That's because it is." She stepped out from the shadows of the garage, holding a fresh lemonade in each hand. Her sundress fluttered lightly in the breeze, and for a moment Jack forgot the rest of the world even existed. He took the glass from her and smiled. "Thanks." They stood there for a beat, sipping, watching Maddie gather paint cans with her friends near the mural wall. Leona glanced over at him. "You know, you never really told me why you came back. Not the simple version. The real one." Jack didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I was lost," he said finally. "My life in Atlanta, it looked good on paper. Job, apartment, paycheck. But it was hollow. And Maddie..." She started asking questions I couldn't answer. About who we were, where we came from. Leona waited, listening. "And this place?" Jack continued, voice lower now, as broken and forgotten as it was, it still had roots. Something in me hoped I'd find parts of myself buried in these walls. Leona reached out her fingers, brushing his. "And did you?" Jack looked at her. "I think I found more than I ever thought I could." Their hands lingered, and for a moment the world slowed. The air thickened with something unspoken, not rushed, but waiting like a chapter that had been building page by page. Then a familiar voice interrupted. "Quite the show out here." They turned to see Calvin standing across the street, suit jacket folded over his arm, expression unreadable. Jack stepped forward, instinctively shielding just a little of Leona behind him. "Didn't expect to see you again." Calvin walked slowly toward them, not with the same smugness as before, but with something quieter. "I watched the vote from my office," he said. "Didn't even stay to see it end. Figured the outcome." Jack said nothing, waiting. Calvin stopped a few feet away, eyes on the sign. "You proved me wrong." Jack let that hang in the air. Calvin's jaw shifted. "I pushed because I thought progress had to look shiny, had to match every blueprint on file. But I forgot that some things aren't meant to be replaced, just repaired." Leona looked surprised. Jack looked cautious. Calvin sighed. "I'm not here to make amends. Not really. Just wanted to say that you earned something rare, something most people only dream of." Jack nodded slowly. "I didn't do it alone." Calvin glanced at Maddie, then at Leona, and back to Jack. "No, you didn't." He turned to leave, but paused. "If there's ever anything you need, materials, permits, a call, I owe you at least that." Jack's voice softened. "We'll hold you to it." Calvin walked off, disappearing around the corner. Not defeated, just changed. And maybe that was enough. Jack turned back to Leona. "Well, that was unexpected." She raised a brow. "You think he means it? I think for once he's not just talking." Maddie ran over, cheeks flushed. "The kids from school want to do a summer workshop here. Art design, maybe some light mechanical stuff." "Can we?" Jack smiled. "That's what this place is for." Later that afternoon, as twilight rolled in and the last of the paint cans were packed away, Jack and Leona stood alone in the entryway. The city was quieter now. The tension that had hung over them for weeks had finally lifted. "I was scared," Jack admitted, "that all of this would be a waste." Leona stepped in close, her hand resting lightly over his heart. "Nothing built with love ever is." Their eyes met, no more running, no more hiding. And in that golden, quiet space between the past and what came next, Jack kissed her. Not rushed, not uncertain, just right. The summer air in Savannah had shifted, no longer heavy with questions, but full of warmth, motion, and quiet momentum. The workshop was humming again, not just with tools and elbow grease, but with laughter paintbrushes clinking in jars, the occasional off-key strum of a borrowed guitar. Jack stood just inside the garage doors, leaning against the old Chevy they'd finally decided to keep. Maddie had convinced him, said it didn't need to run to mean something. She wanted to turn it into a reading nook with string lights and old vinyl seats. He said yes before she could even finish the sentence. She was somewhere out back now, helping Dean set up for the first summer open house. They'd spent a week preparing hanging signs, baking cookies, painting one more coat over the mural wall. Flyers had gone out. A small write-up in the local paper. Jack had half expected no one to show. But they came. By the dozens. Neighbors, old friends, kids from Maddie's school. Clara May with her walker, a few of the council members, even Hal, who stood by the lemonade table like a quiet sentinel, nodding at every smiling passerby. The whole block buzzed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. But it was alive. Leona appeared at Jack's side, her hair tucked up beneath a straw hat, holding 2 paper plates stacked with pie. Dean said if you don't try his pecan recipe, he's revoking your grease privileges, she said with a soft grin. Jack took the plate. He's getting cocky now that he's famous. Leona smiled wider. He says this place made him feel young again. Jack looked out at the crowd. Me too. They ate in silence for a few minutes, watching kids chase each other between makeshift booths. Someone started a small music set on the far side, acoustic, heartfelt. The kind of sound that made everything feel like the golden end of a movie. Leona leaned into him gently. You did it? Jack glanced down at her. We did. She touched his arm. Do you know what the best part is? He shook his head. That girl of yours, she's becoming someone who believes in something. Jack blinked at that. Not because he didn't know it, but because it hit a place he hadn't looked in a while. She's always had it in her, he said. She just needed a reason to show it. Leona nodded. Well, now she's got one. As if on cue, Maddie appeared out of the back lot, hair messy t-shirt streaked with charcoal smudges, cheeks flushed from running. Dad, she called, bounding toward him. You've got to come see the new mural. Gabe's class just finished the outline. Jack stood straight. Right now, yes, right now. Leona laughed. Go. Jack followed Maddie around the corner, dodging folding chairs and a table of brownies. They rounded the back of the garage where a tall white wall had been primed just days ago. It wasn't white anymore. He stopped in his tracks. The mural stretched wide across the bricks, vibrant blues and greens, a splash of burnt orange soft lines blending into sharper edges. It showed the garage at sunrise. Not real, but imagined glowing from within windows, open kids sitting on the curb, someone holding a wrench, someone else holding a brush, and just beneath it, in bold script, a place to begin again. Jack couldn't move. Maddie stepped beside him. I helped with the sky, she whispered. He nodded slowly, eyes full. It's perfect. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. He squeezed back. Behind them, the party carried on, voices, laughter music weaving through the air like thread in a quilt. Jack took a slow breath, feeling it all settle around him. Years ago, he thought this town had nothing left to offer. Just memories he didn't want, and a name he didn't know what to do with. But here he stood now in front of a wall that said everything he never could. He turned to Maddie. Thank you. She frowned. For what? For pulling me back here? For making me look again? She tilted her head. You think we're okay now? Jack smiled. I think we're more than okay. They walked back toward the crowd as the sun began to slip behind the rooftops, casting the street in a warm amber glow. Leona waited at the entrance, arms folded, smile easy. Jack stepped up beside her and didn't hesitate. He took her hand in front of everyone. She didn't pull away. Maddie darted off to grab another lemonade. Dean tried convincing someone that his cookies were the reason for the turnout. Clara May gave someone a history lesson on the building. And Jack stood right there, holding the woman who helped him find his footing, watching the life they'd all built blossom into something more. Not because of grand speeches or big wins, but because they chose to stay, to try, to open the door again even when it creaked and resisted. And in the quiet, just before the sky turned dark, Jack whispered almost to himself, "This is home."